She's charming, calculating, and always 5 steps ahead. The female manipulator isn't just a villain, she's a storyteller, the one who shapes her own truth and makes us question even our deepest beliefs. She uses the roles society gives her, the girlfriend, the victim, the seductress, and turns them into weapons. On screen, these women deceive, dominate, and sometimes even destroy. But is the female manipulator a feminist anti-hero, reclaiming agency in a rigged system? Or does this trope, for all its subversive flair, still play into harmful narratives that paint female power as manipulative and morally corrupt? Hi everyone, my name is Alona Shilova and you're watching Femme-Fatale's Heels channel, where we talk about women, film and women in film. And in this video, I will be talking about the female manipulator trope in film, focusing on specific titles like Gone Girl, The Handmaiden and Strange Darling. Through these films, I want to explore how the female manipulator trope can be understood, what it says about women and how it challenges our traditional expectations of female characters. And at the same time, what harmful stereotypes about women it might reinforce for viewers. So here's a spoiler warning, because the female manipulator trope is often tied to unreliable narration, plot twists and shifting perspectives, which means there's pretty much no way to talk about any of these films without giving away major spoilers. Hi again, it's Alona from editing here, so I just wanted to say that I originally edited this video using fragments from films like Gone Girl and Strange Darling. However, YouTube just blocked it, saying like, no, you cannot publish this video because of copyright content. So here I re-edited the video using screenshots, like shots from the film. Still, I put a lot of effort in the original editing, with the shots from film being in movement. So I didn't want to lose it, and I uploaded it on our Patreon. So yeah, right now now we have a Patreon where you can support us, watch our videos that might be not in reach on YouTube because of many reasons. Some content will be free, for some content you can pay and support us. So I will be very grateful if you check it out, and now if you have an opportunity to support us, I will be very grateful. Now let's get back to the video. She is poised, articulate, and always in control. She knows exactly what people want to hear and when to weaponize the truth. She doesn't just manipulate people, she manipulates the narrative. And who embodies this better than Amy Dunne from Gone Girl? By now, Amy Dunne has long held the status of an iconic character. Online, you can still find heated discussions about whether her portrayal is feminist or just a confirmation of misogynistic fear about women. But one thing's for sure, she always shows up in rankings of the best movie villains alongside her male counterparts, in TikTok montages about female rage. By the way, YouTube age-restricted mine video on female rage, so check it out, in femcel collages and countless other lists. In short, she's everywhere. Amy Dunne struck a nerve, and she continues to live and shine, even nearly a decade after the film's release. So there is no better female manipulator to start this essay with. Just to make sure we are all on the same page, here is a brief recap of Gone Girl. The film begins with Nick, played by Ben Affleck, discovering that his wife has gone missing. He starts cooperating with the police, and at first, everything looks like a mysterious case, a kidnapping, an attack, something along those lines. But as the story unfolds, Nick becomes more and more suspicious, and maybe not as innocent as he seemed. Early on, we find out that Amy is actually alive and staged her own disappearance to punish her husband. What follows is a thriller detective story where essentially both Nick and Amy try to pull the audience to their side by presenting their own versions of the truth. Gone Girl, directed by David Fincher, is an adaptation of the novel of the same name by Gillian Flynn, who also wrote the screenplay. Let me say this right away, I absolutely love Gone Girl. For me, it's a film I can watch over and over again, always discovering new details, whether in the directing, the acting, or the story. But I've also read the book, and as much as I love the film, I think a significant part of the story is better conveyed in the novel, specifically the misogyny and manipulative behavior of Nick himself, because Amy's actions both in the book and in the movie are quite harsh and shocking, which we will talk about in a minute. Nick's character sometimes seems less dangerous by comparison. Sure, he cheats on her, exploits her financial situation, and dismisses her feelings, but he never tries to kill her. At least that's what he insists. Compared to him, Amy's plan involving kidnapping, faking her death, and planting clues for the police with all the details is truly sociopathic. I first watched this film as a teenager, and at that time my initial impression was that it was just another story about a poor guy stuck with a crazy woman. But as I grew up and started exploring feminist film criticism and began making films about women, you can check out my short films on this channel, I realized this story is much deeper. It's about two characters who deserve each other. Unfortunately, while I moved past that teenage perspective, many viewers have not. There is still a portion of the audience that sees Amy as a clear-cut villain, and Nick as a poor guy who made mistakes and got stuck with her. But in the book, unlike the film, Nick's misogyny and hatred toward Amy and women in general is revealed through his internal monologue. He literally flirts with and sometimes lies to the readers, which paints him as an unreliable narrator, not just Amy. Sadly, the film didn't quite capture this balanced perspective, which in my opinion is the main reason why some viewers side with Nick. But it's also important to talk about the broader social aspect, that women are demonized in media in society far more often than men. While working on this video, I actually considered turning this next point into a separate disclaimer, but I will say it here. Since I focus mostly on films, let's take two cinematic examples. Female antagonists tend to receive far more criticism and media backlash than their male counterparts. Take a look at Tony from The Sopranos, Walter from Breaking Bad, or Don from Mad Men. These men are, by all accounts, antagonists. They are morally complex, often cruel, and make choices that are hard to justify. And yet, audiences love them. We root for them, in a way. We are fascinated by their stories because they are portrayed in a grounded, psychologically rich way. We don't need to approve of every action a character takes to be emotionally invested in their arc. Anti-heroes are compelling because they blur the line between good and evil. That moral ambiguity makes them interesting. So when people dedicate essays and video breakdowns to these men, it's not seen as endorsing their violence, it's seen as a good storytelling. But with female characters, the reaction flips. When it comes to women like Amy Dunne, the conversation often becomes deeply personal. I've seen a lot of comments like, "I knew a woman like this," or "My ex was just like her, run guys," usually from male viewers, of course. And if you try to analyze these characters from an emancipatory or non-condemning angle, it's often read as defending or excusing manipulative behavior, simply because the character is a woman. That's why I even debated adding a disclaimer to this video, something like, yes, I know not all women are saints. I, like anyone else, can think of real-life examples in politics or social media, whatever, of women whose actions hurt others, including other women. So I want to make it clear from the start. The goal of this video isn't about justifying toxic behavior. It's about recognizing that women, like men, can be morally complex on screen and in real life. What I'm thrilled about is that it reminded people that yes, there is a goddamn appetite for women who are not saints, who are bad but deliciously so, but also you still can kind of believe in. Would we go to the extent she does? No, we would not. But she is a relatable, not a soppy bitch sort of villainess. You can't write her off, said Gillian Flynn to The Hollywood Reporter in 2019, reflecting on the Gone Girl legacy. I think Gillian Flynn captured the core appeal of Amy Dunne in this quote and sum up what I've been building toward. In media, we rarely see women who are unapologetically antagonistic. More often, when female characters behave badly or immorally, their actions are softened or justified by deeper psychological motives. Take Cersei Lannister, for example. She is one of the most classic female antagonists on TV, but her cruelty is often framed through her maternal instincts, her trauma, and her struggle to survive in a deeply sexist world. Amy, on the other hand, reaches the lengths that female characters are rarely allowed to go, the same length that male antiheroes are often glorified for. I'm not going to offer a definitive psychological diagnosis for Amy because neither the book nor the film explicitly does, but it's often suggested that she exhibits traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and potentially borderline personality disorder. So while I focus on her as a rare example of an unapologetically antagonistic woman, it's also important to acknowledge that her behavior is shaped, at least in part, by psychological factors. Ever since its release, Gone Girl has sparked debate. Is it a feminist story or a misogynistic one? From my perspective, I don't think Gone Girl is a feminist story in the traditional sense. Amy's rage, her revenge, her cruelty, they come from a deeply feminist place. She is reacting to a man who used her, neglected her, and ultimately cast her aside. But what really stood out to me, both while reading the book and watching the film, is that Amy's revenge is ultimately personal. It's not framed as a broader statement against all men through the figure of Nick. She isn't driven by some larger awareness of misogyny or systematic injustice. Her motives may read as feminist, but they don't operate with a feminist context. For example, Amy isn't kind or empathic towards other women. She looks down on them, and if I remember correctly, in the book this perspective is also present. She doesn't see herself or her revenge as part of the collective struggle. It's entirely her own. To better illustrate what I mean, consider Monster starring Charlize Theron. It's not a story about a female manipulator. It's based on real events and is in fact deeply tragic and depressing. But the film does something very powerful. It portrays a female antagonist while clearly grounding her actions in context. Her violence is not abstract. It's shaped by a patriarchal world that exploited her. The men she kills become, in a way, stand-ins for a system that harmed her: patriarchy, classism, homophobia. While her acts of violence come from a personal place, they also serve as a form of symbolic revenge against the system. Her character isn't framed not just as a lone woman lashing out, but as someone whose rage reflects something collective, a structural feminist fury. Monster is feminist in every sense. The violence of men and the consequences of exploiting women are embodied in Theron's character, but we understand she is not an isolated case. Amy's revenge, on the other hand, is far more individual, and that's a key difference, and one of the reasons why people hesitate to call Gone Girl feminist. Amy's violence doesn't serve anyone but her. Violence, especially physical one, is stereotypically coded as male. That's where the trope of the female manipulator comes from. The idea that women are calculating, decideful, always plotting from the shadows. Because traditionally, men are allowed to be direct, which often means violent. Characters like Amy reclaim power in an indirect way, and that's exactly what makes them so compelling to women and so terrifying to men. When Gone Girl was released in 2013, the spectrum of female characters in mainstream cinema was still very limited, usually falling into traditional roles like the girlfriend, the wife, the best friend, who will become your girlfriend or wife, you name it. And while things have started to shift in recent years, Amy's character still felt radical and unexpected back then. A woman completely unrestrained in her calculated revenge. A woman far more dangerous than any man, no matter how strong or confident he appears to be. I already touched on this idea in our video about female rage, which I recommend watching if you haven't yet, that portrayals of violent, unempathetic women tend to deeply unsettle male audiences. They clash with traditional ideas about femininity and the roles women are expected to play. Once again, behavior that male characters have exhibited on screen and in real life for decades suddenly feels crazy or extreme when a woman does the same. So I completely understand why many women enjoy rooting for Amy, myself included. Because she breaks the mold, she challenges norms and lets us finally see something on screen beyond the patient, nurturing mother figure. She embodies the darker aspects of womanhood that are often ignored or suppressed, while still being a complex, psychologically rich character. Years after the release of Gone Girl, there were several attempts to replicate David Fincher's success. Filmmakers became obsessed with the theme of female criminal as a feminist figure, while trying to keep a strong detective or thriller plot. Some attempts were better than others, and some resulted in the film Strange Darling. Also, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like and leave a comment. YouTube likes very much when people engage with content while watching it, so it will be super great and I will be very grateful for your support. And subscribe if you haven't yet. When I finally watched Strange Darling, it had been sitting on my watch list for ages. And that evening I was looking for a thriller with a woman at the center of the story. Honestly, after watching this film, I felt like Ralph Fiennes' character in The Menu, when he tells one of the guests that he wasted his only day off watching a terrible movie and now he's going to burn the lead actor. So from that brief entrance you can understand that I wasn't really fond of this film, to say the least. What you need to understand about Strange Darling is that it's a movie with a very simple, shallow story that keeps the audience's attention only through its structure. The plot is told non-literally and divided into chapters. We keep jumping between them. Chapter 5, then 3, and only near the end do we see the chapter 1, the actual beginning. This technique is designed to reveal the film's main idea: things aren't what they seem. This approach could be clever if only the story itself was worth it. The film opens with a scene where a crying, bloodied woman is running through the woods from an angry man with a shotgun. So it feels like we're entering yet another story where the victim has to outsmart the abuser and survive. The film also mentions at the beginning that the story is based on real events gathered from recent accounts of a serial killer's crimes. But there is the catch. Through these chapters, the film unfolds a different story. The main character is actually a serial killer, and the man chasing her is a cop. She attacked him, tortured him, drugged him, and now she's trying to hide. She hides in the house of an elderly couple and kills one of them. The cop finds her, nearly catches her, calls for backup, but she manages to kill him too. And listen, it's not like I'm trying to simplify what happened on screen. This is literally a recap of the events. No subplot, no character development, nothing. The only thing that keeps you engaged as a viewer is non-chronological structure, but by the end of the film, even that is not enough. But what actually made me incredibly mad and wanting to touch the grass is the scene when the police arrive. The protagonist pretends that the cop raped her. She deliberately pulls down her pants and screams when the police come. A young female officer immediately rushes to help her, but an older male cop says it's not so clear and insists they need to investigate first. And as it turns out, the older cop was right, because the protagonist attacks them and escapes. For me, this scene is the lowest point of the entire story. Not only is the woman who tries to help the supposed SA victim portrayed as naive and stupid, leading to the character's harm, but also the grown man supposedly knows better how to handle victims and the situation, which is usually the opposite in real life. It's a terrible message from a male director. Basically, we are not sure if she is telling the truth, and using SA play as a manipulation tool by the female protagonist is just deeply, painfully off-putting. Yes, in Gone Girl there is also a scene where Amy fakes SA, but David Fincher was able to pull this off because there was a deep psychological portrait and thematic weight. It was just another one of the actions Amy was capable of to cross the line, and this action builds up to the end of the film, all the way to the moment when Amy sits in blood surrounded by male officers who will believe her story because she is playing the victim. In The Strange Darling there is nothing close to that. In interviews, director G.T. Moller said that his approach to the female character was inspired by the archetypal final girl, but he wanted to present her with more context, backstory, and complexity that we have never seen before. This limited description is understandable, since the filmmakers didn't want to reveal spoilers during the promotion. The final girl trope itself is very interesting, both for analysis and reinterpretation. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a separate video exploring its meaning and evolution, because that's something the film doesn't really touch on. The whole film is just a story about psychologically disturbed woman, I guess, who uses sex and manipulation to get what she wants. Now that's a feminist moment. There is no interesting message or character depth, it's just a spectacle with a sexual manipulative killer at the center, all wrapped in some attempt at depth, like, whoa, a woman can be a monster too. You heard that, Charlize? I will say though that I found the leading performances great and the camera work was genuinely well done. It actually contributed to the story. That said, the film pretentiousness was pretty clear from the very first seconds, because it doesn't open with music or compelling imagery. No. It opens with a title card proudly declaring, "This film was shot entirely on 35mm. As someone on Letterboxd put it, shooting a movie on film is cool. Telling us you shot your movie on a film in the very first frame, not cool." And honestly, that line sums up the whole movie. Before we move on to the third film example, I want to highlight something important. So far, the lead characters in both Gone Girl and Strange Darling are white women, and I'm pointing this out for a reason. When I looked for similar examples with black female leads, characters who fit the female manipulator archetype, I found only a few. One was I May Destroy You, which we discussed in our video on revenge narratives, and the other one was Viola Davis's character from How to Get Away with Murder. But still, I don't think any of these examples is fitting. Even though these characters may use manipulation, it's not their defined trait, especially not in a sense that Gone Girl or Strange Darling do. Because for black women, the idea of gaining power through manipulation is far more complicated and often not even an option. When your body and voice are politicized from the start, when you are already seen as a threat, the space to maneuver through cunning or subversion is extremely limited. And while I'm Ukrainian and white, meaning I don't speak from lived experience, I honestly can't imagine a film where a black woman could be covered in blood like Amy Dunne, calmly sitting in front of the police, or banging on a stranger's door begging to be let in like in Strange Darling, and still being believed. Let's be honest, she'd likely to be arrested for crimes she didn't even commit. That's the reality of how race shapes narrative possibilities, and why we rarely see a black female manipulator in mainstream cinema. Not because those characters don't exist, but because the system punishes them long before they can play the game. But what about female manipulators who are neither criminals nor victims? Although this trope is closely tied to detective stories, it doesn't mean that women manipulators always have to be morally gray characters. Sometimes they're victims of circumstances, forced to use their intelligence and feminine charms to break free. Sometimes they seek nothing more than peace and quiet life, a path they have to build through web of intrigue. Sometimes they're heroines like those in The Handmaiden. The Handmaiden, directed by Park Chan-wook, stands out from Gone Girl or Strange Darling in many ways. The film was inspired by the 2002 novel Fingersmith by writer Sarah Waters, with the setting changed from Victoria-era Britain to Korea under Japanese rule. So there are already a few themes in The Handmaiden that can be viewed through a deeper lens, like colonialism and the sapphic relationship that unfolds falls between two female characters. That being said, I won't dive too deep into these topics, otherwise this video will be too long. For example, Princess Wix recently made a great video about enemies to lovers trope, where she discusses the colonialism aspect in depth. I highly recommend watching it, and I will leave the link in the description below. The Handmaiden revolves around two female characters. One of them, a pickpocket named Suk-hee, is hired by Count Fujiwara to gain the trust of the wealthy Lady Hideko and help him steal her fortune. Lady Hideko, on the other hand, lives in an isolated mansion and is being exploited by her uncle Kozuki for the pleasure of male guests. Both Suk-hee and Lady Hideko live under the control of two men, but the story is completely flipped after a major plot twist. The women fall in love and end up outsmarting the men who tried to use them. In this case, female manipulation becomes not just a way to take back control, it literally becomes a path to a brighter future. The film even ends on a happy note, which is still quite rare in queer stories. The source of violence and oppression, as expected, are men, and by the end they destroy each other, while Suk-hee and Lady Hideko escape to a better life. Although I think The Handmaiden is a brilliant film, it also has its questionable moments, mainly in how the director portrays the intimate scenes between the two women. They're extremely explicit and I'd even say borderline pornographic. It's unclear whether the director used the male gaze deliberately, maybe as a form of meta-commentary, or whether it was just a stylistic choice. If you're interested in that aspect, I recommend the video The Lesbian Gaze, which discusses The Handmaiden in more depth. I will also leave the link below. But I still think that The Handmaiden is a rare example of female manipulator characters that are not shown as antagonistic. Through manipulation, Suk-hee and Lady Hideko outsmart their abusers and reclaim their power. When I look at these female manipulator characters, I see something really complex going on. Sometimes manipulation is a way for women to fight back, to take control in a world that often tries to keep them small, like again in The Handmaiden. It's smart, empowering, and even hopeful. But in other cases, like Strange Darling, manipulation just ends up feeling harmful and empty. It leans into those tired, damaging stereotypes about women being deceitful or dangerous without much depth. And then there is Gone Girl, which sits somewhere in the middle. Amy is both fascinating and frightening, and it's hard to say if her story is a feminist revenge or just a dark personal vendetta. So manipulation on screen isn't always the same thing. Sometimes it's a tool for agency and survival, other times it's a way to keep women boxed into old harmful ideas. And that's what makes this trope, in my opinion, so interesting and also so tricky. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't yet. It will really mean a lot to me because I have a goal to make YouTube my full-time job in the nearest future, and for that I need the audience and viewers to grow, so I will be very grateful for your support. Again, thank you for watching and see you in the next videos. Bye bye!